Welcome everybody to Hear Me Out Podcast and Frank Analysis. I'm your host Franco. So my friends Israel and Charles and Dave, also of the political refugee, they don't see the point in taking down all these statues, which I'm sure all of you have already seen in the news already. People are taking down statues of Christopher Columbus and other slave owners. They're even taking down statues of the first U.S. President, George Washington. Now they're making the claim, and conservatives are making the claim, that this is going to lead to a slippery slope of getting rid of erasing history. Now, to that I will say that by keeping these statues up, you're already erasing history. You know, you're keeping certain truths away from people when you're teaching, when you don't teach the truth about what Christopher Columbus did to Native Americans and to children. You know, Christopher Columbus was a child sex trafficker. They don't teach us that in school. History is already being erased, and you, whoever disagrees with taking down these statues or thinks that this is erasing history, you're already a victim of erased history because you don't know this stuff. You know, what are you going to say to all these walking descendants of George Washington who are African Americans? George Washington wasn't African American. If he has descendants that are African American, then where did they come from? You know, they have DNA tests. I know somebody who is a descendant of George Washington, and she's African American. But didn't George Washington have a wife? Did he just have a previous lover and he had a bunch of kids with that lover who was African American? You know, the most likely scenario, if he had slaves, is he probably did stuff to them against their consent. So I don't shed a tear when I see statues being taken down of these people, because the glorification of these people has to end. You know, we need to know the truth about these people. So I'm against erasing history, which is why I am not against taking down of these statues. I want to read this article to you guys by Margaret Kimberley. She's a journalist at the Black Agenda Report, and she has an article here that was presented on Consortium News, and it's titled "Goodbye Columbus." And she makes some great points here about the way that we teach our youth. You know, erasure of history, because, you know, our youth doesn't know the full truth about what people did, what some of these people who have statues have done. Margaret Kimberley goes on to say, the discomfort caused to elites is of no concern to anyone who wants to strike at the heart of racism. Goodbye and good riddance to Churchill, Columbus, Leopold, and all of their ilk, writes Margaret Kimberley. Millions of white people glorify mass murderers because their sense of identity and place in society is deeply tied to white supremacy. The perpetrators of crimes against humanity are often elevated to positions of respect and admiration. It all depends on who did the killing and who was killed. Now the murderers are being called to account. Now Margaret Kimberley brings up King Leopold. And if you don't know who King Leopold is, she's going to tell you. Statues of Belgium's King Leopold have been defaced and even removed. Leopold held the Congo as his personal fiefdom, the Congo Free State, where he killed as many as 15 million people who were forced to work on rubber plantations. 15 million people. 15 million. Think about how crazy that number is. Why aren't we taught about this genocide in school? In US schools, in American schools? Why aren't we taught about this? It's great that we talk about the Holocaust. It's great. It's important for us to learn about this stuff, to learn about the truth. But on top of that, in addition to the Holocaust on Jews by Hitler and the Nazis, we need to also learn about other Holocausts that have happened. Margaret Kimberley goes on to say, the cruelty of murder and mutilation was exposed after a more than 20-year reign of terror. George Washington Williams, a Black American journalist, played a key role in bringing the genocide to public attention. Instead of Adolf Hitler being the only European who comes to mind when genocide is mentioned, the name Leopold ought to have the same effect. But Hitler killed Europeans and Leopold killed Africans. The crimes of one are widely known while the other escapes condemnation because his crimes were erased. There you go. You know, my friends who argue about how they're against the erasing of history, I'm also against the erasure of history. So we need to stop glorifying people when we're only presenting one perspective of them. Maybe they have done something that was great for society in their time. But by glorifying them, we're also forgetting about the massive amount of harm that these people have done, that have also caused. And then people forget about it because they're only remembering the things that we glorify them for. Once again, King Leopold, he killed 15 million people. There are institutions named after this person. There are cities and states named after Columbus and countries named after Christopher Columbus and George Washington. There's a high school in my county that's named after Winston Churchill, which Margaret Kimberly goes on to say that the same can be said of Winston Churchill. During World War II, he presided over a famine in colonial India caused by the theft of rice and wheat, which supplied Britain's armies. An estimated 3 million people died, but starvation in Bengal province was not his first opportunity to commit mass murder. After World War I, he advocated gassing Iraqis who rebelled against British rule. I am strongly in favor of using poison gas against civilized tribes. He had already ordered chemical weapons attacks against the Russian Bolsheviks in 1918. Now Churchill's statue in London's Parliament Square is covered in a large box to protect it from protesters. A group scrawled graffiti which correctly labeled as racist the man who said that his Indian victims breed like rabbits. It's absolutely disgusting. So again, by naming these institutions that are supposed to provide good for people, like high schools, cities and all that, naming them after these people that have caused so much harm, isn't that erasing history? Again, it's important to still learn about these people in school, but show them all the information that's available about these people. Don't just present only the good stuff that they've done when they've also done probably even more bad than good. And some of those foundations still affect us to this day. I wanted to show you guys this tweet by Nico House. Shout out to him. He's a big inspiration for me starting a YouTube channel. He said, here's an idea. Take all the statues down. Every single one of them. Want to learn history? Go to a museum. We shouldn't be doing worshipping any public servant or war hero. Most of the narratives surrounding their legacies were built on lies anyway. That's true. For example, Christopher Columbus, ever since we're little or when you watch children's shows in the US, you learn about how Christopher Columbus was this great person who discovered America. He didn't discover America. Native Americans were already living there. And even if you were to say he was the first European to find America, that's also false, because the Vikings found America before Christopher Columbus did. What this is doing is glorifying colonialism and imperialism. So yeah, good riddance to all those statues that are being taken down. That's not erasing history. Glorifying these statues is erasing history. There's more I want to say about this issue. There's people like Matt Schlapp who says that the statues of Jesus are next. It won't end. Party of the US, pray for the USA. And I said, this is so hyperbolic. Jesus isn't a symbol of racism and slavery. Yeah, at least try to understand why these people are tearing down these statues. They're angry about the system that is still working against them. These people aren't paid well in their jobs. They're living in these poor neighborhoods where they're getting arrested because they rely on selling drugs or being drug addicts because they need more income for survival in order to feed their families. They don't have good education systems to escape the realities of the horrible situations that they live in. Our country isn't doing anything to help them out. And now more than ever during this pandemic, I mean, there's data that shows how this pandemic is disproportionately affecting African Americans and other poor people more than anybody else. So Jesus, he was not a racist, and he wasn't a symbol of slavery, like I said, so they wouldn't have a reason to take it down. And even if people were to take down a statue of Jesus, Jesus wouldn't care at all, because Jesus was against idolatry. If you want to learn about Jesus, read about him in books, in the Bible, and even then, take those things as a grain of salt, because you weren't there to have experienced who Jesus really was. Jesus, if you go to the location where he lived, he was not white. That figure that you see of Jesus, of white Jesus, that's Caesar Borgia. That's the son of Pope Alexander the Sixth of Rome. That's not how Jesus actually looked. Jesus was brown, and Jesus was a socialist, and he was against idolatry of any kind. And that's what people are doing when they have these statues. It's idolatry. I want to bring up a tweet by a user named Caleb Stroll. He said, "Dang, makes you really ponder how they must view our leaders, just a few steps below a deity, Jesus. How is defecation of any human being still a thing we allow at this point? When has any good ever come of it?" And I said, great point. To put people like Washington, Columbus, Andrew Jackson, and others just one step below Jesus is just blasphemy and shows their brainwashed way of thinking. And shout out to D. Pierce, because he was also in this discussion here on Twitter. He calls this a blatant dog whistle for angering religious people for clear political fear motivations. Look, this whole attacking these protesters for taking down statues is a freaking distraction for the real issues that are affecting this country, and trying to pin the religious working class against the left, when really our true enemies, we share a common enemy, and that's the elites that pay the politicians to make rules for the police to treat poor people in the way that they're treating us and killing us for minor crimes. It's a distraction. Margaret Kimberly also calls out Andrew Cuomo, who was saying that, taking down the statue of Christopher Columbus was a disgrace. This need for Cuomo and others to hang on to the criminal is obvious. Columbus puts Italians at the center of the settler colonial state. They're not the Southern European Catholic immigrants who were often looked down upon when they first arrived. Columbus makes them white Americans, and they cling to him lest they lose their imprimatur. The hand-wringing over monument removal is not just connected to reverence for these individuals. While millions of people want change, millions more do not, and they hold on to Columbus or Leopold, or Churchill or Robert E. Lee, because their identity and place in society is firmly tied to white supremacy. If a Columbus statue comes down, so might a small portion of white entitlement and its privileges. Again, this is a great read, so please read the full article by Margaret Kimberly. I'm hoping to discuss this more with my colleagues Israel and Charles. Hopefully I can, and by them watching this video as well, they can understand better why people are taking down these statues and why it's not erasing history to take these statues down. It's more so reminding people about the history that they're not taught. Thanks for watching that segment of Hear Me Out. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit that notification bell down below so you can get the latest on sports, pop culture, and progressive politics. Stay informed.